Today's unSeminary podcast episode is brought to you by Church Community Builder. I love how these guys help church leaders make and grow disciples by providing software and coaching focused on improving operational effectiveness. Church Community Builder provides leaders like me with insights into engagement of our church community, helping us close the gaps that allow people to slip away unnoticed. Visit churchcommunitybuilder.com to learn more.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Thank you so much for listening in. Happy Thursday. I'm just so honored that you would put us in your earbuds today. We know you've got a lot going on at your church, especially as we head into this weekend, and I'm just honored that you would take some time out. Today, you're going to be rewarded for listening in because we've got Heather Larson. She's the executive pastor at Willow Creek Community Church. You no doubt have heard of Willow, really a church of incredible influence, not only in the Chicagoland area where their campuses are, but really around the world. But over 20,000 people attend their locations throughout the Chicagoland area. They started 40 years ago at the Willow Creek Theater, which is hard to believe. When I saw that, I'm like, wow, it's amazing it's been that long. And Heather is the executive pastor there. Heather, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Rich. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to talking with you.
Oh, no, thank you so much. For folks, now there's probably not a lot of those, but for folks that don't know of Willow, kind of give us the Willow story and then tell us a little bit of the Heather Larson story. How does your life intersect with the story of Willow?
It's great. Well, Willow is, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last fall. It was started 4 years ago out of really a high school youth group that grew into the ministry that it is today. So today we have 8 campuses total. Our main South Barrington campus, we've got a Spanish-speaking campus that meets on our church as well. And then we have 6 regionals around the Chicagoland area. So I started on staff here at Willow about 18 years ago and came in working with our college ministry. And really, I was right out of college myself. I had a job with the American Red Cross before that, but got involved at Willow, absolutely loved it, and continued to grow in my role. And I've now been in the executive pastor role for about 3 years.
Fantastic. Well, folks, the church is still led by its founding pastor, a man by the name of Bill Hybels, obviously, great leader. And we ended up in an interesting conversation a couple months ago around, succession. And I really would love to, hear about that. I think there's a lot of churches who really look to Willow in a lot of ways, and I think are looking at whatever happens here in the coming years as really a chance to learn. So no pressure, don't screw this up. But I'd love to hear, just your part in that puzzle, and what is that looking like as we're kind of wrestling to the future here.
Yeah, well, Bill described actually at the Leadership Summit a few years ago that we are in the midst of a multi-year succession plan that is about looking at how do we develop the future of Willow. And, so it's an ongoing conversation for us. It's something we've been in the midst of it. And a lot of us would say it's a very long process right now as well. But I would say we feel a ton of responsibility, a ton of joy, and a ton of just realizing the impact of what this could have to be able to really help transition the church from a founding pastor who's been around to really handing off the keys to the next generation. And it's what we're working towards. It's what we're working hard on. And only God knows what the exact outcome is going to be, but we are in the thick of it right now.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we'll talk about, kind of the front end of this process so far. What are some of the things that you've learned as you've, started to think about the future, started to think, okay, we are looking to hand the keys off, from Bill to kind of the next generation. What are some of those early lessons that you're wrestling with?
So one of the key things that I know you and I had talked about in our previous conversation is that we know that no one person can replace Bill. Bill grew this ministry from the ground up. he has more intricate knowledge of the history and how things happened, and he can look at something and he can spot a problem or an issue right away because he's been immersed in it for 40 years. And we just know it's not possible for one person to come in and fully take on the weight and responsibility of everything that he's carried. So it really has moved us into talking about a team model moving forward of more, what would that look like? What would that look like to split up some of the roles and responsibilities that Bill carries to really be able to see people thrive in the midst of their giftedness, and to really have a fully orbed team that would help lead Willow into the future. And, nothing's finalized. We haven't landed on anything yet. But for us, we're really passionate about figuring out, can a team model of leadership work as we look towards the future in some way?
Now, are there other models that you're looking at or thinking through? So one of the things I think is interesting about our particular organizations that we lead is that often founders or the leaders of churches, and this is a crass way to say it, so I'm not saying you've ever said this. This is me, the way I've tried to capture it is, there's a very real sense that a founder or whoever the lead pastor is, they not only lead the organization, but in a very real sense, they're kind of the core product of the organization. People come because they like to hear, they've been blessed by that person's ministry. Unlike in a corporate setting, if a CEO who's maybe been the founder of the CEO, it's grown, at the end of the day, there are very few examples, maybe, Steve Jobs, maybe, a few examples like that where, the founder is really seen as really bolted to what the organization does. But I think that's a unique challenge we have in churches. How are you thinking about that issue? How is that, how are you addressing that? There's kind of the content side of what a lead pastor does, but then there's also the leadership side of what a lead pastor does.
Yeah, very much so. I think that is part of the reason why this has been such a long process for us, is that it's trying to address really what can be handed off and at what point does that get handed off. I would say one of the mistakes that we made early on is that I think Bill had so much energy to figure out what he could hand off and how it was going to go, that in the very beginning of this process, I actually think he gave away too much of the teaching and too much of his voice.
Right.
And we ended up coming back and saying, no, like you're still here.
Right.
Like we actually want you teaching more than what you have been doing. We want to leverage your gifts and your influence as long as you are in the seat that you're in. So how do you keep leveraging the gifts that he brings and build into and raise up a younger generation at the same time, which is a very interesting balance in between the two. But I would say we spend a lot of time, Bill's very intentional about not wanting our ministry to be Bill driven or focused on his personality.
Right.
And, it's interesting. We had someone come in just recently from the outside, and they said it's one of the things that stood out to them the most about our culture is how much we are values driven and not Bill driven. And in fact, if something is quoted as being Bill driven, Bill goes after it. No, we are a values driven church. We cannot be a personality driven church. And I know that's intentional for him because he, more than anybody, wants to see Willow thrive way into the future beyond when he's leading it. And he knows that's a critical part of it's got to be rooted in values, not in personality.
I think that's a huge takeaway. I hope people are leaning in on that for sure. What are you doing from kind of a team development point of view? A part of what I hear you saying is, I get the impression that it's like, hey, we're all trying to figure out how across the board we have a kind of a velocity of development within the organization to try to build folks up. What is that looking like, and how does that relate to what's happening on this succession, side?
Yeah, I would say while leadership development has been a key part of Willow, really since the very early days, we have increased that and raised the heat on that in recent years, just to crazy levels. But we would say it is the core of what we're doing is developing our teams and developing leaders. And at the end of this process, regardless of what the result is, I know that every single one of us that are engaged in this season will be better people, better leaders, and better pastors because of how we've been developed through this time. So for us as a team, some of the key things that have been really important is, first of all, to put egos aside. We all know that, long run, what we want is we want Willow to be set up to win, and we want each of us to be able to thrive in who God has made us to be, whether that's at Willow or elsewhere. Right. So for us as a team to say, you know what, none of us are fighting or competing for anything. We're going to put egos aside. We want God's best for Willow, and we want God's best for each other, and we're cheering each other on in that. And really, that's a key part, because if anyone was positioning or you had pride issues in the way, what is already a very hard, long, and complicated process would become impossible if that was the case. So we're working really hard on just keeping what is our end goal. And really, when we're unified in that way and focused on that, it makes it joyful to then be going through the process together. But then the other thing that we're doing is lots of candid conversation, talent observation, and development of, you know what, you're great at this, and we need you doing more of this. And you know what, you're not so great at this. Like, let it go. We know you want to do this, but you're not great at it. Let it go. Let so-and-so do it instead. So what's interesting to me, Rich, even as I was thinking about our conversation here today, is the process that we're in the midst of. Like, the reality is, it's what we as leaders should be doing all the time anyway.
Oh, that's good. That's so true.
Because we have a deadline, looming out there, and it's not a hard deadline, but we're trying to pull off succession. We're doing this in a way more focused way than we would normally do it. But honestly, I think it's how we should function all the time as leaders, developing people around us.
Yeah, very cool. Hopefully what it's doing is actually developing, an even more robust culture of leadership development that will go beyond and benefit Willow for years to come, regardless of, because this transition will go as it will go, and it'll be great. And then beyond that, just have all these new leaders. Talk to me about, the internal versus external hiring, acquiring of team members. There are, there's high school football teams, and then there's professional football teams. High school football teams look at the crowd they've got and they say, how do we develop those people? Then you've got professional football teams who are like, we're going to hire the best people, do whatever it takes to get them here. Willow in a lot of ways is one of those unique kind of name brand churches that could literally grasp people from anywhere. I think there's a lot of people out there that would be really interested in working there. But what I perceive as an outsider is Willow has a desire to really develop leaders from within. Even your own story, I think is amazing. Can you talk through that a little bit? Help us understand your thinking on those issues.
So us wanting to do as much as we can internal, that is based on how much we are a values-driven culture and just the DNA of who we are as a church. So the reality is if you were to import some certain leader coming into Willow, it would change the DNA and the values and the culture of who we are. And honestly, a lot of us, there's a lot that we can grow in. Every family has their junk, their strengths and their weaknesses. Every church has its junk. We are not in any way a perfect place, but we do believe the values of who we are it's who God has made us to be. And we're honestly not willing to let go of that yet. I mean, we want to see, can the team here, can those who love this place so dearly, can we take it into the future? And if at some point we would say, we're going to have to import somebody, that very well may happen down the road, but we all want to see what can we do to bring our best, because we so much want to preserve the values of who this church is. And again, it's not that it's perfect, it's not that there's right or wrongs, but with any time you import a leader, you get a full different set of values than what are currently existing in an organization.
Fantastic. No, I think that is an underestimated reality in most churches, that we don't think enough about the values that drive and how our people are so critical to that. Culture is so important for us to build as leaders in our churches. Now, this has been a fantastic conversation. Anything else you want to share before we pivot into the rest of the episode?
I think really for all of us the reality is none of us know what the next 3 years, 5 years, how that functions within our roles. And one of the things all of us have had to do as a team is basically to say, we don't know what the future holds, but we are going to give our best today. We want to be the best leaders that we can be. We want to develop the best culture that we can develop, and we want to build a thriving church. And we're going to be open-handed with leaving the future totally in God's hands. And our circumstances have kind of forced us into that place. But I'll tell you, Rich, what I'm experiencing with that sort of freedom that comes from that, my hope is that I can carry that with me even beyond this season, just because it gives you so much freedom of I'm going to be fully invested and I'm going to totally release the results. And I think I like to think that I could function like that day in and day out. But the reality is our circumstances push us into that right now. And I'm hoping I can take just a little piece of that into the future, because there's just something very sweet about being able to release the results.
This is the unSeminary podcast. Stuff you wish they taught in seminary.
Nice. Well, we're going to jump into the lightning round, that part of the episode where we ask similar questions of everyone that's on the show. Super privileged to have Heather Larson with us today from Willow Creek. It's been a great conversation today. Well, Heather, what's an online resource that you've been using that's been helping you in your ministry?
Okay, well, the online resource that our entire Willow team has been using right now is called Global Corporate Challenge. It's actually a fitness health challenge that we are doing. And we kind of threw it out there as an encouragement to staff teams. We ended up with 54 teams of people who are doing this, all counting their steps throughout the day. It helps us to monitor them. And I will tell you, the level of competition and team building going on around our church right now, the number of meetings that are happening while people are walking. But again, trying to encourage people in their own health, in just their own physical, taking care of themselves, as well as the joy that comes out of that. So Global Corporate Challenge. We're big fans right now.
That's fun. I can see a lot of walking meetings now. A lot of hey, let's go for a walk. That's great.
Exactly.
What's a book you've read in the last, maybe 6 months to a year that's had an impact on your thinking or ministry?
Yeah, for me, Dr. Henry Cloud's book, The Power of the Other, is an extremely powerful resource. I think, we are big fans of Henry. He's had a huge influence on me personally. And this book, especially as he's talking about how important it is in how we engage with other people and the influence and impact that they have on us, and how we communicate with them, how we connect with them deeply, how that affects our influence and our trust. It is a great resource. So it's fantastic.
Nice. So I look forward to the answer to this next question. A lot of people look to Willow Creek as an inspiration. So who do you look to? Who inspires you these days?
Yeah. So I actually, 3 years ago, when I stepped into this role, I got invited to be part of an executive pastor gathering that is, it's really a relatively very small group of executive pastors of influential churches around the country. And when I first showed up at that meeting, I was the only female executive pastor around the room. And really those men who've been in that role, many of them for way longer than I have been, very seasoned in churches that have similar or even more influence in some ways than Willow. And those men really being totally open to questions, engaging. They've been a huge support whenever I've got questions of how something's going. There are certain people around this country that I call first right away. And to be able to have kind of a cohort of people that we're learning, encouraging each other. So I go to that group in those churches around the country.
Very cool. If you could get 15 minutes with any leader alive, who would that be with and why?
Yeah. So the first person that pops into my head is Angela Merkel. I'm fascinated by how she's doing in leading Germany and the dynamics going on there, especially around the refugee crisis. She took some very bold moves and then got a ton of slack on the backside of that. And I would just love to hear what she's learning and what are things that she would have done differently. How would she have managed that change process and how she'd like to handle it moving forward. I would love to have that conversation with her.
Nice. Very cool. Well, I'm sure being executive pastor where you are is a lot of work. What do you do to just kick back, relax, have some fun?
Yeah, I love hanging out with my family. I've got two girls. They're 10 and 12. My husband and I, we love traveling, taking our family on new adventures together, and I love spending tons of time outside. In Chicago, we only get 6 months a year that it's great to be outside. We're outside every chance
6 days, something like that.
Right? Something like that.
That's great.
But for me personally, I love getting my hands in the dirt and gardening. I do that for kind of my own replenishment. I play the oboe of all things.
Nice.
It's helps me just kind of get my, my personality. I'm just wired to move pretty quickly, and things like gardening and yoga and playing the oboe just help me still my mind and my heart a little bit, and slow down the pace of my life, which is just really good for me.
Very cool. Well, Heather, I really appreciate you being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you or with the church, how can they do that?
Yeah, the best way to do that is through social media. So following me on Twitter is a great way to do that, or just emailing the general email at the church as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Heather. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unSeminary.com, and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch, or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.